This morning, you probably moved faster than every human who ever lived before, about 200 years ago, and you didn't even notice. You sat down, you didn't sweat, you didn't risk anything. For 300,000 years, your ancestors had exactly one way to get anywhere: their own two legs. No roads, no warning signs, no way of knowing if the next valley had food, water, or something that wanted to kill them. And yet they kept going, across deserts, oceans, mountain ranges that should have stopped anything without wings, until there was almost no piece of livable land on this planet a human foot hadn't touched. You are the reason that story didn't end early, so let's look at how it happened. Start with your body, because it's stranger than you think. Not the fastest thing built for travel. A cheetah leaves you in the dust in seconds. A horse outruns you without trying. But give you hours instead of seconds, and something changes. You keep going long after faster animals have collapsed. Your feet have natural springs in the arches. Your Achilles tendon stores energy on impact and releases it on the next step. A ligament runs down your neck to keep your head steady, while your body absorbs the shock beneath it, and your skin holds nearly 2 million sweat glands, cooling you while animals with fur are forced to stop and overheat. You were never built to win a sprint. You were built to outlast everything else on the field. In 1978, researcher Mary Leakey found proof of this going back further than almost anything else we know about our species. In Tanzania, in ash from a volcanic eruption, she found footprints, 2 individuals, walking upright, side by side, left there 3.6 million years ago. It will unsettle you how familiar that print looks next to your own. Walking decided who ate, who found water in time, whether your bloodline continued or quietly ended somewhere unremembered. Around 70,000 years ago, small groups began walking out of East Africa slowly, across generations, pushing further into land nobody in their family had ever seen. They crossed the Middle East, spread through Asia, reached freezing Siberia, and eventually crossed into an entire hemisphere no human had ever set foot on. Roughly 24,000 kilometers of walking, by people who had no concept of the scale of what they were part of. And they weren't stumbling forward blindly. Archaeologists have dug up volcanic glass tools hundreds of kilometers from any volcano, shells found far inland, objects that could only have moved that way through deliberate trade with groups they'd never physically meet. They were building something invisible, a web held together by memory and footprints. But eventually walking stopped being enough, because every migration ran into the same obstacle. Not a mountain, water. For most of human history, if you couldn't wade across something, it was the actual edge of your world. Until, somehow, that stopped being true. On the island of Flores, researchers found tools nearly 800,000 years old. Flores has never once been connected to any mainland. Even at the lowest sea levels of the ice ages, somebody crossed that gap anyway. We have no idea what they used. Wood breaks down, plant material rots, and whatever carried them disappeared long before anyone could study it. All we're left with is the fact itself. Someone got there. Maybe it started with an accident. Someone caught in rising floodwater, grabbing a fallen tree in pure panic, discovering they didn't sink. That single moment of survival might be the entire origin of the idea that water could be crossed on purpose instead of just feared. Because around 65,000 years ago, humans made a crossing. Panic alone cannot explain. They reached Australia, 60 miles of open ocean away, with no land visible anywhere along the route. Nobody drifts there accidentally. Somebody built something capable of floating, aimed it at open horizon, and left everything familiar behind on nothing but a guess. Thousands of years later, a group took that instinct somewhere almost unbelievable. Around 3,000 years ago, Polynesian sailors crossed the largest ocean on Earth in double-hulled canoes loaded with entire families, animals, and stored food, navigating by starlight, ocean swells, and the flight patterns of birds returning home at dusk. No instruments, no charts. They reached Hawaii, Easter Island, New Zealand, some crossings over 500 miles with nothing but open water in between. By then, humans had solved land and water. What remained wasn't distance, it was weight. You can walk 30 kilometers in a day. You cannot walk it while dragging an animal larger than your own body. So people adapted. first dragging kills by hand, then lashing two poles into a frame, letting the load ride behind them. Around 15,000 years ago, humans domesticated wolves into dogs and put them straight to work hauling weight across terrain that would have broken a person walking it alone. But dogs could only carry so much. On the grasslands of what is now Kazakhstan, roughly 5,500 years ago, a group known as the Bowtie climbed onto the back of an animal many times their size and asked it to carry them instead. We know because of wear marks on ancient horse teeth. Almost overnight, the fastest a human could travel multiplied, and in a single generation the world became smaller than it had ever been. Which makes the next fact almost impossible to believe. Even after sailing to Australia, even after riding horses across open plains, humans still hadn't invented the wheel. The oldest wheel ever discovered is only about 5,000 years old. People had already crossed oceans tens of thousands of years earlier without one. The wheel wasn't our first idea. It was nearly our last, and it began life as something else entirely. A spinning disc for shaping wet clay. Someone eventually tipped that disc onto its side and asked what would happen if something rode on top of it. Here's what it adds up to. A creature with no claws, no fur thick enough for real cold, no wings, no way to breathe underwater, still reached almost every corner of a planet that offered it nothing for free. It walked when walking was the only option, floated the moment water said no, partnered with wolves and then horses, and only after all of that did it think to build a wheel. You're carrying a device that can summon a car to your exact location in minutes, and some small part of you still gets irritated if it takes 6 instead of 4. We solved distance so thoroughly we forgot it was ever a problem worth solving. But somewhere behind you, someone walked barefoot across land they had no name for, towards somewhere they had never seen and couldn't prove existed. Not chasing anything specific, because staying exactly where they were had always felt like the greater risk. Every highway, every runway, every shipping route on this planet exists because someone once looked at a horizon they couldn't see past and started walking anyway. They didn't know where it led, they went there anyway. And somewhere underneath everything you now call comfortable, that same instinct is still sitting there quietly, waiting for you to listen to it.